Welcome, my friends, back to the fog. In this realm, hatred is as thick as blood, and it is just as potent. The survivors who flee desperately from vicious killers and the destructive murderers who seek them out all understand base and unquestionable hatred. Above all these monsters, there is one whose anger warped him from a mere man into a demon. A man whose hatred was so fierce and so outstanding, it carried through his bloodline to his descendants. This man cannot be called a samurai any longer. He is a demon, an Oni. For Kazan Yamaoka, pride in his samurai heritage was not enough. He wanted to surpass the legendary reputation of his father and become a samurai that would be remembered through the ages. In this disgraceful age where the way of the true samurai was fading, and even simple farmers were pretending to be true samurai, it was disgusting to him. His father tried to instill in him calmness and discipline, to pursue nobler things than petty anger and resentment. But Kazan was too insulted by what he saw in the world, and stealing his father's katana, he set out to deal his wrath on the pretenders, even if it defied everything he'd been taught. Perhaps if he'd only exposed these imposters, or killed them at worst, then maybe it would have all been fine. But Kazan's wrath was brutal and cruel. He butchered imposters in every province, in every territory, and in horrid manners. He humiliated his victims by ripping off their top-knots, stripping their armor from their bodies, and leaving their bodies in broken and demeaning postures. Monks and priests began to believe that the young Yamaoka was possessed by some dark, otherworldly force, and the local daimyo referred to him as Oni Yamaoka. This insult confused and angered Kazan. Why was the daimyo slandering him and his family? Was he not a hero? Was he not a spirit of vengeance? He had redeemed the samurai name. He had removed impostors and villains from the streets. His rage only grew when he heard people refer to him as Oni Yamaoka, and he cut them down as he did the impostors. The word infuriated him. Why was he an Oni for doing what was right? Was it for his battlefield skill? Was it because he used a kanabo to smash the skulls of the impostors? Perhaps it was because of the tongues he took as trophies from his defeated victims. But whatever the reason, it was irrelevant. It was an insult, and the daimyo would pay for it. When Kazan reached the land of the daimyo to finally put an end to the slanderous fiend, he was stopped by a lone samurai who challenged him. The two fought, but it was clear to Kazan that this samurai was strong. Stronger than him. They fought viciously, but in the moment of truth, the samurai hesitated, halting his attack. Kazan lunged at his opponent and struck down the samurai in cold blood. As his enemy fell, he ripped off the foe's mask and staggered back at what he saw. It was his father's. It was his father's face staring up at him, an expression of regret and shame on his face. Kazan fled the sight, terrified, broken, screaming madly in pain and in disbelief. His own father. He'd killed his father. When he finally returned to the body, his father was gone, stolen by thieves. Kazan wandered aimlessly, lost and confused. His head was filled with voices and mocking laughter. Anger boiled within him, rage and fury that would not rest. He had to kill the lord who had insulted him, the daimyo who caused all this. He'd die. He'd die and be made an example. With a newfound fury, he entered the lord's domain and was faced by 12 samurai prepared to kill him. He butchered them with his kanabo, his strength and wrath unbelievable. When he reached the lord, he dragged him out, cut his leg muscles to watch him squirm on the ground, begging and moaning. He then ripped out his tongue from the man's mouth, and finally butchered him like a pig. Finally satisfied, Kazan exited the villa, only to be met by an army of farmers and peasants, armed with tools and makeshift weapons, with the intention of avenging their daimyo. Kazan held out at first, but he was surrounded, and he was swiftly overwhelmed by the angry peasants. He was beaten, stabbed, and tortured. They dragged him to a stone mill and tortured him further, leaving him to die there. Though peasants returned a few days later to check and see if the Oni Yamaoka was dead, none dared go near that place, for it now was surrounded by a black fog that was rich with a strange malevolence. Rumors spread around the nation of a vengeful Oni that now haunted this region. though none were brave enough to venture in and confirm the rumors. The Oni's lore is perhaps the best DBD has offered so far. It's simplistic, but incredibly well done. The story of Kazan following what he believes to be the honorable path and the righteous one of removing villains and imposters is actually one that I kinda like, as I'm sure we all secretly know some folks out there who claim to be something that they aren't, and we want to see them brought down a peg. The problem was he thought that taking the matter into his own hands and killing his quarry would make him a hero, demonstrating his warped idea of what it meant to be a samurai and what it meant to have honor. And this rage that he carries passed down through his family all the way down to Rin Yamaoka, who would become the Spirit. I really like the concept, and it's one that's actually common in East Asian ghost stories and curses, where rage and hatred doesn't die but gets passed on. If you've ever watched movies like Ju-on the Grudge, you see that in Japanese folklore that anger and rage can pass from victim to victim, leading to an endless line of curses, victims, monsters, and bodies. This is another extension of that, which I adore. I think the only thing that would have made this stronger is if we explored more of the relationship between Kazan and his father to help make the pain of him killing his father more meaningful. Not that it isn't there, but we probably could have gone even further. Now, the Oni's power is essentially Hillbilly's power, but packaged differently. It's called Yamaoka's Wrath. When you start the trial, you are in absorption mode. Injured survivors will leave behind blood orbs that you can collect by holding down the power button. Absorbing blood orbs slows your movement speed, but fills your power gauge. Hitting survivors gives you a larger amount of blood orbs on hit, and once the gauge is filled, you can no longer absorb blood orbs, and you can activate Blood Fury. Once Blood Fury is active, the Oni will roar and trade his katana for his kanabo. In this mode, the Oni gains access to two new abilities, Demon Dash and Demon Strike. By pressing and holding the power button, Demon Dash allows the Oni to run at a great speed, clearing large distances quickly, but his ability to make sharp turns is diminished. By pressing and holding the attack button, while Blood Fury is active, the Oni will deliver a Demon Strike. It has an extended launch, and a successful strike will instantly down a survivor. But be warned that picking up a survivor while Blood Fury is active will take you out of Blood Fury, although your power gauge will be partly filled. The Oni's power is incredibly good, but can be bested by smart survivors. Because the Oni has trouble turning hard while in Demon Dash, most survivors simply run to a loop location and run it endlessly until Blood Fury runs out. Also, some survivors are skilled enough to know how to dodge just in time before getting hit. This makes playing the Oni frustrating against those smarter survivors, but very rewarding when you manage to pull off good kills. A feat which, for me, is unfortunately rare. Although I will say this, if there is one nice little perk to playing the Oni, it is the Blood Orbs. Quite nicely, if you have a survivor who's very good at running away, the Blood Orbs will always be a good way to track them down, because the Blood Orbs will remain there indefinitely, at least until you absorb them. Now moving on from his power, the Oni's perks are Zenshin Tactics, Blood Echo, and Nemesis. Zenshin Tactics is an aura reading perk that can be very useful to predict the survivor's movements. It allows you to see the auras of all vault locations, pallets, breakable walls, and windows on the battlefield, allowing you to get an idea of where your prey will go next and what to do about it. Blood Echo is a perk that punishes survivors even when they're not hooked. Each time you hook a survivor, all other injured survivors suffer from the hemorrhage and exhausted status effect for 45 seconds. This effect triggers every 60 seconds. And the perk makes sure that all survivors who are avoiding you are worn down and find it harder to escape you. However, it's one perk that I think can be replaced with other stronger ones. It honestly isn't really good enough to warrant it, if you ask me. And then finally, Nemesis. It's a revenge perk, which pairs well with hubris and endurance. Any survivor who blinds you or stuns you becomes your obsession. Whenever a new survivor becomes your obsession by any means, that survivor suffers from the Oblivious status effect for 60 seconds, and their aura is revealed to you for 4 seconds. I like this perk not just for its ability to get back at those who stun me, but also because of what it can potentially do. Certain survivor perks make it so that if they are the obsession, they will get certain benefits as a result, and I like the idea of constantly swapping out who the obsession is so that it can't always be the case, shaking up the name of the match. In conclusion, I think that the Oni has probably the best lore in Dead by Daylight as of right now. I still need to read the rest of them, obviously, but I feel like he's got the best original lore. I really like his design, his lore, and his power is also pretty good. He's got 2 pretty decent perks, one that isn't that great, but overall the Oni is a grade A win for Dead by Daylight, and definitely a killer that I was really excited to get to. But now as we wrap up the Curse Legacy chapter, we move on to the next chapter of Dead by Daylight, where we take a trip out west to meet a killer from Ireland who, quite frankly, is really hard for me to get behind because he's so difficult to master, and a survivor who is definitely a survivor. I'm probably going to take a bit of a break from DBD after this, guys, but once I get back to it, we'll take a look at that survivor and killer, and I will see you next time in the fog. Take care.